Hello there, and welcome to episode 29 of the Unqualified Opinion Sports Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Marko Yerkovich. Also joining me on this episode, Will Byerman.
How you doing, Marko?
Great. So we've got a lot of interesting things to get to, including the conclusion of the very epic Nuggets-Jazz series, some NBA coaching searches that are going on right now. We'll be picking our NFL division winners, as well as some ongoing news in the Messi transfer saga with Barcelona. With that being said, let's get straight into it, talking about what was an epic series between Donovan Mitchell and Jamal Murray. So just between the two of them, who do you think had the better series? Again, obviously the Nuggets winning it in 7, but which player had the better series in your eyes?
I think Donovan Mitchell is far and away a better player normally. However, I mean, Jamal Murray, they were coming down from the Nuggets beat the Jazz, who had a 3-1 lead, and Jamal Murray was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, both of these players they set the record for most combined points by an opposing duo with 475 points. The previous record was 463, held by Jerry West and John Havlicek, and that was from 1969. So that's a long time to have that record. That's a pretty significant milestone, and they blew it wide open. Super impressed from Donovan Mitchell and Jamal Murray. Very surprised Jamal Murray was the one who actually stepped it up here. I didn't really believe that he was going to be that guy because, I mean, obviously we saw him struggle tremendously in the playoffs last year. He's even struggled earlier in the series. If anyone took over like that, I thought it was going to be Jokic, but Murray stepped up and he really did kind of will his team into that. And I believe this is the 10th or 11th time the 3-1 lead has been blown. So
yeah, it's very new to it's a very unique situation. Yeah, as you mentioned, Donovan Mitchell and Jamal Murray were really on fire all series. Mitchell led the playoffs in points per game. Jamal Murray was 4th, just also behind Kawhi Leonard and James Harden. So that just puts into perspective how efficient these guys were and how much these teams relied on them. So in this series, but also just in general, who had the better supporting cast? Who has the better supporting cast between the two of them?
It's really tough to say right now because of who's been injured and who's been missing for most of the playoffs. They both have an all-star, all-NBA level co-star, really. I mean, I think Jokic is pretty far away better than... I mean, we're talking almost about Jamal Murray. He's had an excellent series. He had a phenomenal series there. However, Nikola Jokic is still head and shoulders above Jamal Murray as a player. The Nuggets, then, if you look at their roster, they're without Will Barton and Gary Harris for a lot of that. Michael Porter Jr. was red hot, then he wasn't. And Paul Millsap and Jeremy Grant kind of rounded out that team's rotation. And that's a pretty strong group. I'd say that's probably stronger than the Jazz in general. Gobert looked better on offense for the Jazz than he normally has. Mike Conley had his kid, and he kind of went supernova like Fred VanVleet. But with the Jazz, I just always feel like, obviously, got to mention Joe Ingles, and they're one of the most underappreciated players in the league. But the Jazz really, I'm surprised they made it this far because Bojan Bogdanovic, that's a 20-point scorer who they didn't have for any of the bubble games, any of the playoff games. I'm really surprised they hung around so well. One of my good buddies is a big Jazz fan. And even before the series, even before the bubble started, he was like, yeah, dude, I really have no idea how we're going to make up for that scoring. And it really took a lot from the Jazz to even get there. Donovan Mitchell probably had the more impressive series, not when it comes to numbers, but just because Jamal Murray had a lot of capable offensive players around who were capable of putting up some big numbers. Mitchell didn't really have that luxury as much. Like Jordan Clarkson was probably their third best scoring option usually. And I guess my last thoughts on the series, Marko, was that was a pretty interesting last game too. I mean, what was the final score?
80-78, low-scoring affair.
That is
both teams shot, I believe, less than 40% from the field. It was pretty abysmal.
That's an incredibly low-scoring game, not especially for the playoffs. It just had some.
That's close to a halftime score at this point.
I know, dude. The playoffs just had some pretty ridiculous stats so far. I was super shocked to see the winning team only score 80, and then obviously the Donovan Mitchell buzzer beater that rolled out. That was a super dramatic shot. That was Mike
Conley, actually.
Mike Conley.
A lot of people are trying to make something out of the fact that Mike Conley took the final shot instead of Donovan Mitchell, but they got that rebound with 4 seconds left. They just got it in the hands of the person with the best opportunity. I don't really think that there's some big drama. If Mike Conley would have made that shot, we're not having the same conversation at all. Again, it just comes down to those split-second moments. If Mike Conley makes that shot, we're not talking about Donovan Mitchell not taking the shot. We're talking about, oh, why is Jamal Murray pushing up the court, and then why does Torrey Craig miss a layup, or why don't they just dribble the clock out? It would totally have changed the narrative of this series, despite how down to the wire it really was.
And I was thinking about Mitchell instead of Conley there, because the most dramatic moment probably after the shot was cameras instantly go to Mitchell as he collapses there. Jamal Murray walks over. They have a nice little moment there. So, the game really did live up to the hype with its dramatics, for sure.
Yeah, and as far as this series, again, it was a tremendous series. But looking to the future, obviously this will be the second straight year that the Nuggets advance past the first round. Utah, a perennial first-round exit, although occasionally they have gotten into the second round. But which team, looking at the players they have around, the potential first-round picks, and the promising young guys, do you think has the most promising future? In my eyes, it's very clearly the Denver Nuggets. All of their best players are under the age of 26. Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Gary Harris, and then you even mentioned earlier when you were talking about the series, Michael Porter Jr. There's potential for Bol to be good. We don't really know yet. Denver does develop talent very well. And when you're looking at the other side with the Jazz, it's really just Donovan Mitchell. Everybody else is really where they're at and can't get any better. If not, a guy like Mike Conley is probably declining at this point. So my pick for that is the Nuggets. What's your thought on the teams themselves?
100% agree there, Marco. Looking at the Nuggets, Jokic is obviously an all-NBA player. He's one of the most, at least play style-wise, unique players we've ever seen in the game of basketball. The way he handles the ball, the way he passes at his size, and I think there's a lot of room for him to improve too as a three-point shooter, as a shooter in general. I don't think we've come close to seeing the best from Jokic because he still has yet to really take that alpha dog scoring mentality that comes with most stars. I think if he can tap into that a bit, he'll put up some more crazy numbers, because the real reason he's underrated is because he doesn't really post the obscene scoring numbers you're used to from a Harden or a Doncic. And then even going over to Jamal Murray, who does have those numbers, I don't know if I'm ready to crown him the superstar. People seem to be ready to do that. I'm not really there because we've seen him struggle a lot during other playoff series and other regular season games. He has all-star potential for sure. I just want to see him put that together for a full year, be a star for a full season. But if you look around, the Nuggets have some issues there. Will Barton, he's young enough. He's 27. He's young enough that he's going to stick around, and he's going to be in his prime as a rotation guy, as a good scoring wing for a couple of years. Gary Harris really has kind of decreased almost every year since his rookie year. But Michael Porter Jr. has all the potential in the world. Bol could be pretty unreal, even though that's a pretty major long shot. But the big thing to remember with the Nuggets too is they develop talent at remarkable level. And then look at the Jazz. Ingles is old. Ingles, again, super underrated. Ingles is old. Gobert, you can't do a lot with Gobert. He's a great defender. However, I don't think he's ever going to be a phenomenal offensive player. They really just need more offense. Bojan Bogdanovic has a lot of staying power because he can shoot well. But if you look at that Jazz bench they were bringing out, there's not really any young players or big names there that really inspire that much confidence for the future.
Right, and of course, news just coming out, that Donovan Mitchell, he's getting an extension, a max contract, well-deserved. Jamal Murray, his extension just now kicking in next year. That's going to go through 2024. It's clearly now hopefully going to be well-deserved, but I'm still of the mind that, the Nuggets could potentially move a few pieces to get even better. But that's something we can discuss in the future. Of course, the biggest thing on the plate for the Nuggets right now is the second-round series against the title favorites, the LA Clippers. We'll see how they handle that, and we'll be talking about that here in the coming weeks. For now, let's move on to teams that are either didn't make the playoffs or already out of the playoffs that are now, in a coaching search after firing their head coach. I want to start with one team really quickly that hasn't fired their head coach, but it's looking pretty likely that it'll happen. Mike D'Antoni, if he leaves the Rockets after this season, again, he's still in the final year of his contract with no extension. So if he leaves, who could hire him potentially? And I also must preface this question with, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. Game 7 of Rockets Thunder has not been played yet. I assume if they lose, he will be fired. If they win, we don't know yet.
First of all, I think it'd be a massive mistake for the Houston Rockets to fire D'Antoni. He's one of the most innovative coaches in the history of the game.
I agree.
Really, if the Rockets aren't gonna make it out of this round, it's not because of coaching. It's because they don't have a good roster. I'll say that. Harden's obviously amazing, and then Russell Westbrook's he's all-star level. He's close to all-star level. He's not what he used to be, and I don't know if I think he could achieve his previous stats again. I don't think it's with the Rockets, but D'Antoni's actually made him a lot more efficient. I mean, Covington, PJ Tucker, Eric Gordon, those guys are all really nice pieces. They have some younger guys like Danuel House who are pretty intriguing, and they even fixed up Ben McLemore, who was a pretty egregious bust for a long time. But you don't want Covington or Tucker or Gordon to be the third best or maybe even fourth best player on your team. Covington and Tucker should be like your fifth best player. They haven't given him a great roster to work with. He's done a phenomenal job there. Now, the name I see the most is the Indiana Pacers. And I think that'd be a really strong fit, honestly. He could do a lot with them, with Sabonis, with Turner, obviously with Victor Oladipo coming back, TJ Warren. There's a lot of pieces there, and I think he could do a really good job there. I mean, if they can make it this far with Nat McMillan, who, by the way, as you and me talked about last week, is a great coach in his own right, I think D'Antoni could take that roster to even higher limits.
So as far as D'Antoni, again, got to preface this with, we're recording this Wednesday afternoon. This will come out sometime Thursday or Friday. And by then, you listening will know the result of that series. It's my belief that the Rockets will win the series. And, then they have to play the Lakers, and that will probably not end well for the Rockets, although we've seen crazier things. So do you think, as far as D'Antoni's, position with the Rockets, if he loses to the Lakers, do you think he'll be fired, or does he hang on for another year? Again, he's out of contract in Houston, so it's all up in the air still.
For me, honestly, the question isn't even like, will he be fired? Again, he's out of contract. I could easily see him wanting to leave that situation for all the reasons I said before. Like, they haven't given him great pieces. You don't hear a lot of good things about Tillman.
And they're backed into a hole too, as far as their salary and their roster. I mean, they have wiggled out of every possible situation. Some people don't like the way Daryl Morey has constructed this roster, but I still have to give him credit for the fact that he was able to somehow get to where this roster is today, given where they were 3 or 4 years ago.
Again, though, they have an owner who does not really... The Rockets before were pretty happy to blow up that luxury tax, get over that salary cap limit as best they could. That's not the case anymore, and I think D'Antoni also might just cost a little more than they're hoping for. But I think if they make it to the second round and lose to the Lakers, I think he goes, but I don't think it's because they fire him. I think he might just be ready to move on.
Right. And then let's look at a few more teams that have some coaching vacancies. A really important one, not just for this team, but potentially for the future of the league, is who can replace Alvin Gentry in New Orleans and help usher in Zion Williamson to becoming an all-star player and potentially making this team somewhat relevant.
Honestly, Marko, I think the best move for the Pelicans would be hire probably the most underrated coach in the league, Jim Boylan. And I am absolutely messing with you, Marko.
Yeah, I would
Don't
hope
worry
so.
there. No, I'm not on anything illicit there. But, I mean, you kind of see, you have your usual core group of names for every open job right now. Tyronn Lue, Jason Kidd, Kenny Atkinson. Not me saying they're the best, but those are the high-profile names that are going to be mentioned in almost every situation there. I think Kenny Atkinson, for a team like the Pelicans, or even the Bulls, who I know we're not going to get that into, he built a roster out of almost nothing with last year's Nets. I think he's probably the best choice for the Pelicans, especially to maximize Zion's potential. And the one thing you have to realize is it might be tricky for Ingram, just got most improved player. He's likely to get a big money deal. There's speculation he could end up leaving New Orleans, but I don't see that happening. You're going to have to make sure you can balance Ingram with Williamson as they both continue to grow and develop. There's a lot of moving pieces in the Pelicans. There's a lot of young guys, a lot of potential. I think Atkins is probably the best choice to fill in for that. And then honestly, Jacques Vaughn, the Nets intern coach, could be a pretty strong choice there too. I don't know if I see Tyronn Lue or Jason Kidd being a great fit there.
Okay, yeah, and of course, this is a monumental decision for this franchise. But again, the league is, in a transitional period where they're looking for new young stars. They want Zion to be one very badly, but looking at how treacherous the Western Conference will be for the next 3 to 5 years, and the way this team is constructed, they're a fringe playoff team at best. So they need a coach to really make this unit cohesive and get them across the line. Another name you didn't mention that I think is worthwhile to throw into almost any discussion, and we'll throw this name into the next discussion, is Mark Jackson, the former Warriors coach and the current ESPN commentator.
I would love for Mark Jackson to take a coaching job so I don't have to hear him do commentary anymore.
I mean, that's certainly an opinion to have. I think as far as Mark Jackson goes, though, we don't know, obviously, the offers he's gotten. He could have turned down certain offers that we don't know about, but he has not been a coach for the last 6 to 7 years, and I find that amazing. Again, he could be just really comfortable in his commentating job and not want to go away from that, but I think he's a potential option as a head coach in almost any situation. Then moving on to this last one, again, another one of big importance for the league overall is who should the 76ers target to try and help, Embiid and Simmons flourish together and become title contenders as they're supposed to be in Philadelphia.
So if you look at the rumored coaches, it's kind of is your standard group I talked about with Lou, Atkinson, Jason Kidd. I think Lou or Jason Kidd would be a better fit here. They're bad fits for New Orleans or Chicago because those guys aren't program builders. I could see them doing a much better job with the Sixers roster that's not complete, but at the same time, it has a lot more veterans, and they have some form of identity they want to go with. I feel like they're better off with a coach who's more... I mean, Lou has championship pedigree from his time with the Cavs, and Jason Kidd shown he can be a pretty good coach at times, although he did have that weird year at the Nets. If you remember the infamous mouthing to Tyshawn Taylor, you need to bump into me to get that so we could spill the drink for the technical foul. So weird up and down. Seriously, the coaching for Kidd with the Nets, but he's been a pretty good assistant for the Lakers. But the really interesting name here is going to be Villanova's Jay Wright. I don't think this is extremely likely, but the Athletic interviewed legendary NBA head coach Rick Pitino. And by legendary, I mean legendarily skilled at gutting your Boston Celtics.
Yep.
But no, they interviewed him about the transition from NCAA coach to NBA head coach. And he says he thinks Jay Wright has what it takes to be an NBA head coach. And I think the most interesting to note there is he said Jay Wright likes Philadelphia a lot. He would not have to leave his area to be the Philadelphia coach. I think
it's almost a perfect fit, right?
I think it almost is a perfect fit too.
Being in the same city, definitely maybe almost being able to bring in some of his own guys. He can still stay connected to the program and see, hey, are these some of the guys I'd like to bring in? And certainly, of course, he has the pedigree. And this is not something we talked about with the previous teams, but there's a lot of very good college coaches out there that could potentially be filling in these NBA roles. I know the NBA has become of a different echelon as far as who becomes coaches, and it seems to be like the same 45 guys filling the same 30 spots over and over and over again. Well, I mean, it's a bit hard to break into, but there are a number of successful coaching stories in that transition, and I certainly think it's possible.
The problem with the college coaches is there definitely is a stigma in the NBA against them. I mean, there's been guys like Brad Stevens is probably the best example, who's been he's been a great NBA head coach after he was in a phenomenal. I mean, I remember seeing him coming up as a coach. He was an absolute prodigy for how young he was. And he's had a really good NBA career so far. But at the same time, you see plenty of guys like John Beilein who couldn't even last a full year in Cleveland because college and NBA, very different games at the end of the year. And
completely different.
You see guys like Calipari and Coach K who don't want to touch the NBA. But I really do think Jay Wright could be a phenomenal coach.
And that's certainly a good option for Philadelphia.
He's just a great basketball mind. And the Villanova guys, if you look at his recruits and his players, he's dealing with a lot of tough, independent, mature NBA-ready players, Eric Paschall, Archie Diacono. He's not dealing with like these like top-rated kind of diva college prospects. He's playing with a lot of guys who are pretty NBA-ready and who are usually pretty mature and ready to get to work on the court. So
Absolutely.
I think he comes from the pedigree to do that.
He is certainly, again, all of these positions could potentially be filled by college coaches, but if I had to put my money on it, the one organization that would most likely, pick a college coach, I would definitely say Philadelphia with Jay Wright. It seems to fit really well. And again, this coaching search for multiple teams, again, we can get into the Nets and the Bulls in the coming weeks, and maybe the Pacers more specifically. Will, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Always great to be here, Marko. Take care.
All right, so with that, we're going to actually move into an NFL discussion here with Tim Seipel, and we'll be discussing the NFL division winners. So your pick for the NFC East champions.
Yeah, as much as this might come as a surprise, I do think the Dallas Cowboys will be able to pull it out this season, but they continually fail to meet expectations, especially in previous seasons where we've seen them just really not meet their full potential, as this is a stacked team. I mean, this team is easily, roster-wise, one of the best teams in the league, but with the change in coach, and they no longer have Jason Garrett, they now have Mike McCarthy, we are seeing hopefully a change where they will actually be able to take full advantage of what they have on their roster. I know there was a big loss in Travis Frederick, but they picked up a Wisconsin center in the draft, so hopefully he might be able to transition in quite easily. And with the addition of CeeDee Lamb as well at wide receiver, they're only stacking up their offense even more, and they have some great weapons there. And on the defensive end, they're always really good. So I think they end up pulling it out against the Eagles. I think the Eagles are kind of the second team in that ranking, but they are the Cowboys, so you never know.
Right, and so I think I agree with you. I will also pick the Dallas Cowboys, and I think this is for three factors. Of course, we've got the coaching change in Dallas, which you mentioned. I think Mike McCarthy is far and away a better coach than Jason Garrett will ever be, just from player management to in-game adjustments and just general aggressiveness in-game. We always talked about how conservative of a play caller Jason Garrett was, and he was just okay with an average performance. I don't think Mike McCarthy will be okay with that. Obviously, the second addition, you mentioned offensive firepower. CeeDee Lamb, I think he has a potential to probably be the leading receiver on this team. Obviously, depending upon how Amari Cooper performs. I know he's been really up and down. But Amari Cooper is also an underrated wide receiver. Of course, Ezekiel Elliott, just a ground and pound running back. We can't underestimate how good Ezekiel Elliott is, even behind, as you mentioned, a deteriorating offensive line. And then the final element here is honestly Carson Wentz's health. I don't trust him to stay healthy, and I also don't see Philly as having an explosive enough offense to mask an injury. Or even with him, they tend to lose games where their offense just can't produce enough to get them going. So that's what we have in the NFC East, both going with the Cowboys. So now your pick for the NFC North.
Yeah, so this will come to a surprise as well. But I'm going with the Green Bay Packers. So obviously, starting off with a draft, they didn't really perform as well as other people would want them to, and for me, obviously, I don't agree with all their draft picks, but I look at the losses that the other teams have had. You got the Vikings who've lost their defensive end, Danielle Hunter, and then they ended up losing Stephon Diggs or trading away Stephon Diggs, which really left a gap, and it'll be interesting to see how rookie Justin Jefferson fills that role. But I think when I look at the Packers, they have not lost nearly as much as the other teams have. They have a top 10 defense still, and their offense, hopefully, if Aaron Rodgers gets back on track, they'll be back, and hopefully they'll be in good form, but that's a big if. Aaron Rodgers has kind of taken a decline over the past couple years, and I'm not blind to that, but I do believe that there is a possibility he gets back to his original form.
So I agree with most everything that you said. I just see it a little bit differently. Again, I think we would both agree that it's going to come down to probably one game between the two of these teams, but I have to go with the other side of this one. I have to go with the Minnesota Vikings. You mentioned their loss on the defensive end spot, but they traded for Njoku, I believe it is, from the Jaguars. So they're filling in that gap. And while Justin Jefferson certainly isn't Stephon Diggs, I don't think they need him to be because this is a run-first offense. And also, Adam Thielen is your number one wide receiver. I trust Jefferson, again, coming from LSU and that very pass-happy system, he clearly knows what he's doing in a pro-style offense. And then overall, you mentioned Aaron Rodgers' decline slightly. We know what's happening, and it's not his fault. I mean, it's going to eventually happen through age. He's 38 years old at this point. We saw it with Peyton Manning and a little bit with Tom Brady. At some point, age eventually just slows you down a little bit, and he's going to be less mobile. And I tend to trust Kirk Cousins more than most people. He had a better season than Aaron Rodgers did last year, and even you've admitted that. I mean, he was a Pro Bowl caliber player, and they just got unlucky at a few stages in the game.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think it's interesting to see what kind of offense the Green Bay Packers are going to be bringing in, because it's going to be a more 49ers-like offense, especially with their third-round pickup of Josiah DeGuara, who is a tight end who they're looking to more use as an extra blocker as well. So they are looking into maybe a less mobile Aaron Rodgers and maybe focusing more on a run attack with the addition of A.J. Dillon as well, Boston College running back. He is just an absolute beast. I think he has 5% body fat, and
he's a bruiser.
He is up there with Derrick Henry. So it'll be interesting to see how they transition him into the running back group. I know they already have Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones, but we'll definitely see how well they transition into maybe a more run-first offense than maybe Aaron Rodgers is used to.
Okay, and then so we're going to move on to the NFC South now. Your pick for that division?
I think it's pretty clear. Easily one of the most balanced teams in the NFL, and that's the New Orleans Saints. I mean, with a healthy Drew Brees, this team is absolutely stacked. They added Emmanuel Sanders, a veteran wide receiver, over the offseason, and to have him opposite of Michael Thomas. And then you've also got Alvin Kamara and Jared Cook, who towards the end of the season, Jared Cook was probably one of the better tight ends in the league as he was producing at a very high level. And then on the defensive end, they picked up Malcolm Jenkins from the Eagles. And then they also have players like defensive end Cameron Jordan and linebacker Demario Davis that are clearly underrated. So this is a team that is really, I think this is one of the teams to beat in the NFC, and they are looking to be Super Bowl contenders for sure.
And I certainly agree with you on this one again. And you mentioned everything. A really balanced, filled out roster with Pro Bowlers at pretty much every single positional group on the field. Certainly not only the most complete team in the NFC South, but possibly in the league. You of course have to mention the fact that Tampa Bay with Tom Brady, despite any decline he may have, they were 7-9 last year, and a number of those were really close games. And people are saying, well, you just switch out Tom Brady for Jameis Winston. But really, when you look structurally at the Buccaneers, yes, they have the flashy wide receiver group, but there's really no solid run game. The tight ends are good, and the defensive line is good, but they are dead last in pass defense, which will be a huge issue. And I just overall think, again, as you mentioned, the Saints are a very complete team, very solid. And yes, Drew Brees has shown some pretty decent, decline in the past few years. It was my opinion, honestly, that they should have signed Teddy Bridgewater and just had him as a backup for maybe 1 or 2 more years, and he would have been the clear, heir to the throne for Drew Brees. But that's aside the point. This year, is this team is tremendous. I mean, they're Super Bowl contenders. They've won 26 games in the past 2 years. They've been pretty much unstoppable in the regular season, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon. So moving on to the final division in the NFC, who do you have in the West?
Yeah, this one is definitely a tight race. I mean, you obviously have the San Francisco 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks at 1 and 2, but you don't know which. And I'm going to have to go with the Seahawks. I think for this year, I think the key is going to be Russell Wilson. I think each year, obviously, for the Seahawks, the key is probably always Russell Wilson, but I definitely think that he's going to come in and have a really good year. They still have Tyler Lockett. Their defense is getting better with the trade of Jamal Adams from the Jets. And with a mediocre run defense, that's the only scary part of whether or not they'll be the number one slot. Obviously, you have the 49ers who have a great offensive attack, but really lack on the passing end. So it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works, and I'm excited for these two matchups. It might just come down to home field advantage in the end, but I'm definitely going to have to go with the Seahawks.
And you made a lot of good points. And I think one thing we really need to remember about this is last year, really, they were fighting for a battle for the second seed and the fifth seed. And it took a goal line stand by the 49ers to keep Seattle out of the end zone in that week. I think 16 or 17 matchup.
It was 17, yeah.
Way at the end of the season there. And that would have dramatically shifted the narratives for the postseason and the matchups. Who knows if the 49ers have to face the Saints, or it could have changed everything. The 49ers maybe don't make it to the Super Bowl. Maybe Seattle does. I mean, it changes everything. But as far as this season goes, I certainly hear what you're saying about Seattle, but I think there's too many gaps in the team, and I think San Francisco probably had the best offseason of any team, to be honest, who they acquired through the draft. They basically got Brandon Ayuk in the first round, is essentially a replacement for Emmanuel Sanders in many ways. Yes, they traded away DeForest Buckner, but they got a solid replacement in Kinlaw on the defensive line, so that's still going to be a monster unit. And then honestly, I mean, probably the trade of the season, getting Trent
Williams.
Thank you. For a fourth round pick.
Yeah.
Are you serious? I mean, could you have thought of an easier, better replacement for Joe Staley? I mean, they're not going to skip a beat. They'll probably be better, to be quite honest with you. Really, the thing it comes down to with these two teams is the quarterback play, because obviously Russell Wilson is by and large the better player than Jimmy Garoppolo, but Garoppolo certainly has the better pieces. I think you would agree. But I think Garoppolo, he just has to do enough, right? Essentially,
I think that's the biggest thing for me is I'm not sold on Jimmy G.
Very few people are.
Yeah, he's a risk, and that's why he's probably not getting drafted in most fantasy drafts. Is that he's not a player that's very consistent, and I think he has quite a bit of maturing still left to do. I think the two big question marks for these two teams are on the 49ers side, Jimmy G. And on the Seahawks side, Jadeveon Clowney, a name that we really haven't talked about. Is he going to be signed by the Seahawks, or is he going somewhere else?
Well, he's certainly going to a title contender, or at least a really good team with a lot of cap space. And there's certainly limited options at this point. And hell, we may even see him sit out this season. Who knows? Remain to be seen what that could do. Again, you're talking that is a player that really shifts the dynamic in a football game. You have to think about him on every down. You have to game plan for him. So he's very important. So as far as that goes, those are our divisional picks for the NFC. We'll be doing the AFC next week. Until then, Tim, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and with that, let's move on to our weekly pick'ems with Paul Hires.
Yeah, and it's good that we got pick'ems back this year, ready for season 2.
All right, so yeah, let's go right into it. This first one is a bit odd, but given the nature of our show, that it's once a week, and the NBA playoffs, they're playing games every other day. Sometimes, the series don't line up with when we're recording. So right now, we're recording Wednesday afternoon, as I mentioned earlier in the show. So the Rockets-Thunder series is not finished, but we're picking them against the Lakers. Tim, Jared, Joseph, and Will have all picked the Lakers, and I have to do the same. I'll be honest, I really wanted to pick the Rockets in this series, and I would have if we would have done the pick'ems all at once for an NBA playoff bracket. I'll be serious about that. I really thought the Rockets had something special going. They're dynamic, they're quick, they can switch everybody, and I really thought they would just shoot everyone else out of the league, honestly. But they've played terribly. The defense hasn't been as dynamic as I'd hoped, and I'm just here assuming that the Rockets will win Game 7 against the Thunder tonight. But even if the Rockets shoot lights out, I think LeBron and AD could buckle down and beat them in 6 or 7 games. Paul, who's your pick?
I picked the Thunder last week, and I have no idea if that's going to hold up. I mean, this series has been back and forth every single game. I mean, I don't even know who's going to win this game, but I think no matter who wins it, the Lakers are going to take them in the next round. You mentioned it. Anthony Davis is just an offensive factor for the Lakers. I mean, looking at the Lakers and Blazers series, every time the Lakers went into a slump, it was always Anthony Davis that got him out. they'll probably drop a couple of games, but I say the Lakers take it in 6.
Okay, so moving on to the other Western Conference series. This one actually a set series of the two teams we know that will be participating. It's the LA Clippers against the Denver Nuggets. Tim, Jared, Joseph, and Will all picking the Clippers, and I must do the same. Again, they're actually probably getting Pat Beverly back for this series. Kawhi Leonard has turned it up to another level. Paul George seems to be out of that weird slump he was in at the beginning of the Mavs series. And honestly, I think the Mavericks are probably the third or fourth best team in the West. And they were just, they had the misfortune of being matched up against the Clippers in the first round. So I think the Clippers, it was a bit of a wake-up call. Oh gosh, this first-round opponent, they're not going to be easy. And I think they'll carry that into the Nuggets series and beyond. So I've got the Clippers, again, Kawhi Leonard and this team, they're not unstoppable, but they're certainly the best team remaining in the playoffs at this point.
Yeah, and I really like the points you made about, Dallas being not only probably a better seed in the West than they were, but also just that being a wake-up call for them. And I mean, we know the Clippers are better, but it just seems like this whole season they've just been kind of like in a relaxed mode, just kind of waiting until a bigger game to like bring out the big guns for when they want to win. And quite honestly, they waited until, what was it, game 5 or 6?
Yeah.
Until they actually did that against the Mavericks. I think they take that momentum into this series against against Denver. I think Jamal Murray and Jokic could probably pull off one win, but I got to go Clippers in 5 in this one.
All right, so moving on, we've actually got some baseball, a weekend series between the San Diego Padres and the Oakland Athletics. Tim is going with the Padres, Jared and Joseph with the Oakland Athletics, and Will also with the Padres. I have to agree with Tim and Will on this one. I think the Padres are playing well, and they're actually going to make a concerted push here towards the end. I know they're leading their division, and I really believe that San Diego, again, I know this season is unlike anything we've seen in baseball, so really everything's up in the air as far as how teams have been prepared and how they came into the season and how they'll execute. But honestly, even once we get into the playoffs, everything's still going to be completely crazy. And I think if this is the year for San Diego to finally complete this turnaround, finally complete this rebuild, the Padres will win this series, and I think they'll probably go on to probably be one of the top seeds in the conference.
And on top of that, I mean, we talk about this year being different. The home field advantage is completely taken out of the equation because there's just no fans in the stands. And, I mean, maybe the only thing that would probably make a difference is the home team gets to the bottom of the inning, for late game purposes. Things could make it easier for the home team. That being said, though, you take a look at this matchup. I mean, on the surface, the records are about the same, but the trend is key. The Padres took 3 of 4 against the Rockies coming into this series. There will be an Angels series between those two. But if you really dig deep, San Diego's got the better roster on hand. I mean, you look at the batting leaders. Number 1 for the A's is Mark Hanna with 268. I mean, that is not what you want your leading batter to look like versus the Padres. Fernando Tatis Jr. has been going off. He's already got 13 home runs with a .313 average coming into this game. You take a look at the pitching end of things, it'll be Davies versus Luzardo on Friday night. Davies has been solid so far, 5 wins, 2.61 ERA to this point. I just think the Padres have a better offense against the Athletics pitching. I think they get it done.
All right, and it's great to have baseball back on the podcast. We're probably, in our weekly pick'ems, we'll probably get a weekend series in there every once in a while, if not every week until playoffs, and we'll do some previews for that. So moving on to another sport that is certainly good to welcome back to the podcast. We've got some college football, certainly the most prominent matchup of the upcoming weekend, BYU against Navy. Tim went with Navy, Jared went with BYU, Joseph went with Navy, and Will went with BYU. So I will have to go with the Navy midshipmen. Again, I just trust the system that Navy runs as far as they're not really geared to, run the score up, but clearly they're a team that values possession, both in the time of possession and the ball itself. They never turn the ball over. And they're, surprisingly, though, they're a really aggressive offense in their play calling. And they're very flexible within the triple option as far as the way they move players around. They have a lot of motion in their offense. And the defense, you always worry with the Navy defense, especially on the defensive line. They don't quite have the size that a regular college football team would have, considering the limitations of being a military academy. But they seem to have a system that works quite well, and I'm not super intimidated by what BYU would bring to the field.
Yeah, and not an expert on the rosters of these two teams, but BYU just typically has been this inconsistent. You don't know whether they're going to show up for a game or not. They might be able to take down a team like Wisconsin. We saw that one year. Or they might just not show up and lose. But we took a look at this Navy team. They had 3 wins 2 years ago, and they turned it around last year, going 11-2 with a 20-17 AutoZone Liberty Bowl win against Kansas State to cap it off last year. And their 2 losses were against Memphis, who we know went to a New Year's Six Bowl, and Notre Dame, which it wasn't a very close loss, but nonetheless, Notre Dame is still, a reasonable loss to have. And if you're Navy, I don't, like I said, I don't know a whole lot about their returning roster, but 11-2, that's a good season. I got to go with Navy.
All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us with the Pick'ems. And I know probably in the coming weeks, we'll have some just the number segments to also go along with these Pick'ems once there's actual numbers to keep track of.
Yep. And that'll be fun. Getting back into baseball, getting back into college football. It'll be fun talking with you.
All right, Paul, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. And so with that, we're also now going to welcome in Joseph Arena to the podcast to talk some Chelsea transfer news and, of course, the ongoing Lionel Messi saga. So, Joseph, let's start very quickly with Chelsea and their complete spending spree here under Roman Abramovich. Just your overall thoughts on the current transfers.
Yeah, first off, happy to be back. So great week if you're a Chelsea fan. They have brought in a lot of new talent, especially on the offensive end. Hakim Ziyech from Ajax has been playing there for about a couple weeks now, but that was a $44 million deal that they were able to seal. Timo Werner, also, that was done a while ago, from RB Leipzig for $55.3 million. And then, as of today, Kai Havertz from Leverkusen for over $95 million. So they have spent a lot of money this transfer window, which they haven't been able to do for a while with their transfer ban after last season, and they seem to be making up for it a lot this year.
Yeah, and as far as I'm concerned here, they had a solid attack, with not a lot of very solid guys, but Giroud and Tammy Abrahams running, the number 9 spot, and you had Pulisic and Willian and Pedro on the wings, and I know they needed a replacement for Willian and Pedro who were going out, but they really haven't added a traditional striker here. I mean, when you look at Ziyech and Havertz, they probably work more as number 10s, operating at the top of the midfield, linking play with the attacking 3. Ziyech, people say he can play on the wings, but he's really not a traditional winger, especially at his size, and his just general build. He's a bulkier guy. Wouldn't really be able to keep up playing on the wings. And Werner, as far as I'm concerned, he's a very solid striker. But my question to you is, with the amount of money they've spent, and as already prolific as an offense as they were early, last season, how good is this? How much better can they finally be with adding these many signings? How many more points can they get? How many more goals can they have?
Well, for starters, I think that this is going to be a very interesting thing to see. How does Timo Werner work in Chelsea's system? They have had 3 straight out-and-out forwards that are big names. Gonzalo Higuain, who came to the club and absolutely flopped. And then Alvaro Morata, who was at the club and then flopped as well. And they sold him to Atletico Madrid. They just got the transfer money fairly recently. And now they are looking to get Timo Werner. And hopefully, if you're a Chelsea fan, he does not flop. But
that Hakeem Ziyech, I think it'll be very interesting to see where he does start. If he does start, I would assume he would, but they do have, like you said, a very strong squad pretty much everywhere, especially in the front. I mean, when you look at how they could possibly line up, they've got in the midfield Jorginho and then Conte, Havertz, and Kovacic, who are all very quality. Jorginho, Kovacic, and Conte all playing a little bit more defensively rather than Havertz being more of a center attacking mid. But still, you've got about 3 spots that they'll probably be picking between there. And then up top, you've got Ziyech, Werner, Pulisic, Mason Mount, who can also play in the midfield, and then Hudson-Odoi. They've got a lot of different options. So it'll be interesting to see how they line up, how they manage the positions of these guys, how they manage their time. And hopefully, from an American perspective, hopefully Pulisic can get some good experience around some really, really talented guys.
And what you're saying is, this attack is very, very solid, and it can always get better. But I really think that the weakness of this team was very clearly the defense. And to be more specific, the center center backs, obviously, needed a lot of improvement. So what do you think Thiago Silva, from experience and a player perspective? Of course, Malang Sarr is also good, but really the experience that Thiago Silva is going to bring to this squad?
So I think that Thiago Silva, at least in my opinion, he's 35 years old. He's not going to be there for much longer, in my opinion. I think that what he does is he brings Champions League experience. They are going to be playing in the Champions League as they did finish 4th this season. And I think that it'll be steadying that back line for about a year, hopefully giving maybe Malang Sarr some advice, helping him grow in the role of a center back, and then probably move on. I don't see him staying there for too long. I don't see him being a club legend or anything like that.
It's just a 2-year contract, and I think what you're saying is completely the truth. It's kind of a bridge signing. They're just trying to maybe show players how to be better professionals, and also maybe give time for maybe Tomori and Andres Christensen to really become first-team players, first-team quality. And certainly they're not there yet. So that maybe they need that. Of course, also Ben Chilwell on the left side. He's certainly maybe not a better attacker than Alonso, but certainly a more proper left back. Certainly a better defender than Marcos Alonso is. So I think Chilwell, and at the price, I'm not sure. Obviously Chilwell, he's playing in the Prem. He's an English fullback, so that obviously is going to elevate his cost. And to get him for $50 million, not the most savvy business move, but at the way they're spending money, do you think that's manageable?
Yeah, I think they're just throwing money at pretty much anyone that they can. Everything that they've bought pretty much has been over 45 mil, besides Thiago Silva
some
and
pretty
Sarr.
Insane spending sprees. But, obviously, there's a lot of people that believe this spending spree needs to continue when looking at the play of Kepa, the goalkeeper this season. He was in a league of his own in terms of how terrible he played. He was truly abysmal. Is he salvageable? Do they need to find a replacement?
So, I think I'm alone on this one, but I personally think that Kepa's a pretty decent goalkeeper. He was phenomenal in his first season when he came. People tend to forget they won the Europa League, and he was a big part of that, especially in their penalty shootout against Eintracht Frankfurt. I believe it was in the semifinals. He was a very, very good shot stopper. For some reason, this last year, he just did not have it. Whether that was a mental thing, whether that was his defense being very poor. Their defense gave up the most goals of anyone in the top 10, and it wasn't even close. They had 55 goals against, I believe.
Yeah, they gave up the same amount of goals as Burnley.
And I believe it was less than Crystal Palace. So if you follow the Prem, you know how bad that is.
That's basically putting yourself 14th or 15th out of 20 teams. I mean, that's basically you're in the bottom 4th defensively speaking. So that's also why I believe the Thiago signing, Ben Chilwell, and Malang Sarr, that's important. But, the buck stops at the keeper. So we'll see what Kepa does. I mean, do you think they need a replacement? Is there time to bring in a replacement?
I don't think so. I think he's a young guy. They do have Caballero as a backup. I think he's a very, very good backup that he can play. He can start if they need him to. And Kepa can play his games, and if he is working through a bad spell, he can probably get through that. I don't think that it was a problem on his end, especially when it's that big of a margin. I don't think you can say it's one person that was.
Let's say they'll come January and the poor form is still continuing. Then is this a true issue?
I think it may be, but at least from what I've seen, yeah, he's made some mistakes, but I mean, you look at De Gea, I don't think they needed to make the massive signing that they did with Dean Henderson. I personally think that with a goalkeeper, the more time you give them, the more confidence and the more commitment that you can give them to that club, the better they're going to play. And if you give him more time to start, if you give him more time to get used to his back line and to get used to his midfield, I think that he will only get better from where he was last year. Obviously, that's not very hard. He had a very, very bad year, but he's got a better defense this year now with Thiago Silva and Sarr. He's got a much better midfield. Hopefully, they can keep the ball higher up the pitch with Havertz. And I would say if they can knock that goals against total down a little bit, maybe 5, 10, even 15 if possible, we're talking second or maybe even Premier League wins if they can do that, because they were a phenomenal attacking team.
Yeah, and that was more my concern with the Ziyech, Werner, and Havertz signing is how much better can this team get offensively? You can only score so many goals. You have to defend on the other end. I guess Man City has shown this past season that you can outscore your opponents at will if you score 100 goals a season. But certainly this Chelsea team looks very promising. Should for sure secure European football next season. Should get pretty far in the League Cups as far as I'm concerned, and possibly challenge the Liverpool and Man City for the title. So moving on, before we get to the Messi transfer saga, let's just run down some general big transfer news around Europe. Let's just run that down very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been some fantastic deals, especially if you're an American fan. Weston McKennie to Juventus, one of the biggest high-profile signings besides Pulisic to come from an American. This is a really, really good opportunity for Weston McKennie to play in the midfield under Andrea Pirlo. It is just a loan, but it did come at a hefty price with $4.95 million. So that shows that Juventus is invested in him and definitely wants him to play. They did just also bring in Artur, and they got rid of Pjanic in that swap deal that went final today.
So with the McKennie signing, though, it's a loan, but the transfer clause, the buy clause, gets initiated after a certain amount of games played, correct? I think if he plays 15 league games, which is more than likely to happen, especially if they like his form. So that's, it's a loan to buy, but it's more than likely a purchase for Juventus, and a cheap one at that, especially from a Bundesliga team that would have been keen to either keep him or at least get peak value.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that his experience will only grow, and I hope that it can translate to the national team. Hopefully we can make it to a World Cup this time. That'd be kind of dope. But yeah, I'm excited to see what happens, especially in Juve's midfield. They've had a very, very old midfield, and now they seem to be going to a younger midfield who is able to control the ball, win it back very quickly. That's what Weston McKennie is kind of all about, is his high-tempo, aggressive play style. So that'll be very nice.
So any other big transfers to run down here quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about Sane to Bayern last week for 49.5 mil, which is relatively cheap considering how young he is and how good he is.
And what he was valued at by Manchester City just maybe even 8 to 12 months ago.
Absolutely.
Bayern, I think I said this last week, it's the most Bayern signing of all time.
It was beautiful for them. Hakimi to Inter Milan for 44 million. He is very young. He showed that he had a lot of talent at Borussia Dortmund. So now having him at Inter will be very good for them. Nathan Ake to Manchester City, only strengthening that back line. That was a relatively expensive deal, actually, from Bournemouth for 49.8 mil. And then just finished today, Van de Beek to Manchester United from Ajax for 42.9 mil. That's a very, very good signing for them to have Bruno Fernandes and then Paul Pogba in that midfield. I think it'll be very nice.
Yeah, tremendous. And I don't see Van der Beek getting as many minutes with those guys in the midfield, considering that he's, he kind of would play the same role as Pogba. They'd want a more deeper lying guy at the 6th spot. You'd maybe consider like a Nemanja Matic to play with Pogba, who tries to be more progressive, and then allow Bruno Fernandes to be the creator. But certainly Van der Beek's going to get some good minutes. He'll play a lot in the cup. And those other signings you mentioned, Ake, absolutely crucial for Manchester City to really secure that back line. If they want to stay even semi-competitive with Liverpool, I mean, again, they got blown out of the water last season by Liverpool points-wise. Certainly not in the goals department as much, but they want to stay competitive. They really have to shore up that back line, and that is certainly a step in the right direction. So yeah, great on those transfers. And then let's get to what is obviously the biggest news of the past week and a half to 2 weeks in the world of soccer, the ongoing transfer saga with Lionel Messi. La Liga itself put out a statement saying that Barcelona must receive this 700 million euro buyout for Messi to go anywhere. Messi's father even flew to Barcelona to talk with the team president Bartomeu and the board, and it's really getting messy. But there's the pun that finally you can make. Shamefully, I suppose. But just your overall thoughts on what's going on here.
Yeah, I think this is really kind of a conflict of interest because for La Liga specifically, obviously they don't want to lose the best player in the world, possibly in history. So when it kind of came down to them, I really don't think there was ever any doubt in them saying, he's gonna
especially
stay.
Considering they lost Ronaldo just recently, and also the fact that for the first time in 13 years, there was not a single La Liga squad in the Champions League semifinal. That's certainly lingering over their heads, considering Atletico Madrid has certainly lost some continental power. Real Madrid is certainly still strong, but not what they used to be. And then if Barcelona goes full rebuild, I mean, you're talking at the potential next season that Sevilla makes it the furthest in the Champions League, which is not what La Liga wants at all. But just kind of your thoughts maybe on the Manchester City side of things. It's rumored that they've already agreed terms with Messi. And again, they've refined that 3-2 model to get him to New York City eventually. Just your overall thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that with the meeting that is going to be happening in the next day or so, I heard that there was a meeting between Jorge Messi, Messi's father, who's his agent, and the Barcelona board today. There hasn't been any results from it that have come out yet, but I believe there's also going to be another meeting with Lionel Messi himself and the board. And there is some discussion. Is it going to be, we're going to make these changes, please stay? Or is it going to be Messi just saying, I'm out and you need to do something about it? So I think it'll be very dependent on that meeting. I really don't know what I could say about it because I don't know. You don't know. No one knows outside of the people that are going to be in that meeting. Right. And I don't think they even know.
And as far as, we talked about this last week also, that this could just be, a giant ploy by Messi to get what he wants within the organization. If he wanted Bartomeu out, I don't know why he would take such an aggressive stance now, considering the Barcelona presidential elections are next summer, because they've brought in Koeman for 1 year, and then the new president will obviously want a new manager. So there's just a whole, there's a lot going on here that Lionel Messi cannot control. But as far as what Barcelona can offer, I think it's too far gone. I think, especially considering the rumors that he's already agreed to personal terms with Manchester City, I legitimately believe he'd be willing to sit out for 12 months rather than to play for Barcelona, because I think he's burned that bridge pretty thoroughly. But honestly, the more likely scenario in my eyes, which sounds crazy to say, I think it's more likely that Manchester City would pay 700 million euros than to see Messi sit out for a year. I legitimately believe that to be a possibility.
I hope, as a soccer fan, that he doesn't sit out for a year. I think that would be a massive blemish on his record as a player, especially looking back. Like, people are going to start talking about what happened to that year that he just decided not to play soccer. But I don't see that 700 mil. That's an insane number. I don't think even Man City can do that.
Maybe Barcelona would obviously lessen that fee and maybe take a few players in exchange. And it would be more reasonable, although what is reasonable these days? But it would certainly have to be a world record fee, if not certainly very high. And obviously Manchester City would be willing to spend that, considering the global pull that Messi has, not only as a player, but, in the marketing realm. I mean, whatever they were to spend on Messi, they would make it back in an instant. considering just putting his name on the back of your jersey makes you the most popular club in the world. What do you see is the most likely scenario for this saga to play out in?
So the way that I see this playing out is the meeting in the next couple days goes in favor of Messi, goes in their favor, and the club, goes and says, you know what, we'll let you leave. And they do it on a free. But it is according to the club. Like La Liga said, there is still that clause, which means that the club now has to approve any purchase.
Right. I was of opinion, I know we discussed this, that I think Messi has grounds, to say, hey, I know I've set this clause in my contract to say, by May 31st, I must tell you if I intend to use this, free buyout. But the season didn't end on May 31st. I think he has grounds for that argument. Whether or not that's the way it's resolved, or Barcelona just, okay, fine, go. This has been a media nightmare for us, and we are just trying to rebuild here. We can't just pay you upwards of 100 million euros to just sit for an entire year. That would destroy us financially. What jersey is he wearing come September or October time?
I think the only one you can honestly say is an Argentina one. I think
that's a tremendous answer, by the way.
He could go anywhere. I mean, there's 3 clubs that are still interested, that are still able to pay that fee, or pay his fees and his wages. But it's Juve, PSG, and Man City. And other than that, I can't see him going anywhere. I can't see him doing anything. And I hope, as a soccer fan, as a purist, as a person who enjoys watching him on the field, I hope he goes somewhere and is able to resolve this without it being a massive disaster. I hope that it is not a case of, a messy breakup between the 2 most popular things on the entire soccer sphere. I mean, the most popular player and one of the most popular clubs in history. I think this would be a monumental occasion if it did wind up going down as a horrible breakup, if you will.
Most certainly. And we talked about it last week. We talked about it this week. And we will probably talk about it for many more weeks to come.
Absolutely.
And Joseph, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
And that is also pretty much it for today's episode. Again, if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your own unqualified opinions in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for listening to episode 29, and we will see you next week.